Buongiorno a tutti, spero mi sentiate, spero che la tecnologia ci aiuti. Io introduco a questo convegno a nome ovviamente degli organizzatori che appunto voi non mi dilungo, potete trovare anche sul leaflet che è stato diffuso. Ringrazio in particolare appunto, abbiamo lavorato insieme con Patrizia Cappellini, con Cristiano Giometti, con Marco Mozzo e con Paolo Cohen. Questo convegno in qualche maniera idealmente si ricollega a un convegno che si era tenuto nel 2017 presso il Kunsthistorisches Institut di Firenze, il mercato d'arte in Italia intorno al 1900, ed è per questo anche che ci è sembrato opportuno chiedere a Costanza Caraffa di introdurlo con appunto con un discorso che presentasse, diciamo, i problemi che sono legati al mercato e alla fotografia. Io ringrazio vivamente tutti gli intervenuti, ringrazio il dottor Carlo Birrozzi e in particolare il dottor Stefano Casciu, per aver voluto, per essersi appunto resi disponibili in quanto parte in causa di questo convegno a introdurre i lavori. Come avete visto dal programma, il convegno presenta un calendario estremamente fitto, e quindi io mi limito in questa parte introduttiva, che è molto, diciamo, serve molto da comunicazione di servizio, anche a chiedere ulteriormente ai relatori, a coloro che parleranno, di tenere possibilmente i tempi come era stato previsto. Naturalmente abbiamo cercato anche di dare, abbiamo pensato che era opportuno dare ampio spazio, appunto, semmai a un momento di discussione e di appunto tramite domande che potranno essere rivolte, che noi ci faremmo carico di poi di inoltrare, diciamo, a chi modererà le varie sezioni. I moderatori avranno un compito molto ingrato, in questo caso ci siamo assunti un compito molto ingrato, che sarà quello appunto di tenere i tempi, e avverto anche che abbiamo pensato di limitare le nostre presentazioni, anche se anche questa, diciamo così, è un compito un po' che un po' ci pesa, a limitare le nostre presentazioni a dire il nome di colui che parlerà e semplicemente la sua affiliazione, anche se spesso sono colleghi che vorremmo presentare appunto in maniera molto più ampia. Io vi ringrazio molto di di partecipare a questo convegno, e non so se posso, visto che questa è la prima sessione, è una sessione in inglese, volevo dire appunto semplicemente tradurre molto, cioè sintetizzare, diciamo, le parole, le cose che ho detto ora, rivolgendomi in inglese ai relatori stranieri. Thank you a lot to all those who will participate to this conference, and we are very grateful for your participation, which in some cases is from very remote places and with different hours, as Darius Spieth previously underlined. And we have you seen the schedule is very dense, and we will be compelled to ask you. We are compelled to ask you to limit yourself to the time which has attributed to each contribution to each paper. Our task as moderators will be very hard, will be very ungrateful, because we will have to interrupt you after 15, 17, 18 minutes, and but we will hope that the discussion, the space that we have devoted to discussions will be fruitful. So thank you all for your participation, and hopefully good work to all of you and all of us. Thank you.
Pronto?
Prego il dottor Birrozzi di
Perfetto.
collegarsi e di aprire il suo microfono, perché
Mi
come dicevo...
sentite?
Sì?
Perfetto.
Sì, la sentiamo bene.
Benissimo. Bene, io ringrazio Donata Levi, ringrazio gli organizzatori di questo convegno per aver voluto che i saluti istituzionali venissero affidati al Ministero della Cultura e in particolare questo saluto di apertura all'Istituto Centrale per il Catalogo e la Documentazione. È un onore che accetto volentieri, ma che riconosce e soprattutto presuppone un impegno da parte tanto del Ministero quanto dell'ICCD che credo la mia amministrazione e l'istituto che in questo momento mi capita di dirigere hanno portato avanti per anni. Le fototeche, sia la fototeca che l'aerofototeca dell'istituto sono tra le raccolte pubbliche più importanti d'Italia. Ma quello che mi interessa molto sottolineare è che insieme ai materiali che conserviamo qui a Roma, al San Michele, possiamo ancora vantare delle grandi competenze. E forse è proprio tutto questo che mi sta molto più a cuore, che mi sta a cuore. La possibilità di continuare a gestire, avere sotto la perfetta consapevolezza del patrimonio che abbiamo e di poter ancora utilizzare tutta quella sapienza che è stata accumulata nel tempo e che ci consente ancora oggi di far funzionare le nostre macchine fotografiche e di riprodurre fotografie con la stessa capacità che avevano gli inventori della fotografia e comunque i maestri degli anni passati. Siamo stati nelle condizioni di sostenere per esempio degli artisti in residenza nella riproduzione di carte salate e di altre fotografie con tecniche storiche, e questa capacità, questa sapienza mi sembra che sia veramente un fiore all'occhiello di questo istituto. Continuiamo a formare studiosi, ad affiancare gli studiosi su questo tipo di temi e continuiamo a fare dei ricercatissimi corsi di riconoscimento e di interpretazione delle tecniche storiche. Tecniche che molto spesso sono importanti quanto la capacità dell'interpretazione dell'immagine e della lettura dei contenuti delle fotografie. Spero che tutto questo possa continuare nel tempo e che quindi insieme alla quantità di materiali conservati possiamo ancora essere in grado di gestire e di comprendere la fotografia storica. In questi anni poi non ci siamo tirati indietro e partecipiamo a tutte quelle attività di regolazione e di formazione di linee guida che costituiscono un elemento molto importante per la gestione delle collezioni di fotografia storica. Direi che quando Arago presentò nel 1839 le invenzioni fatte da Daguerre, tanto all'Accademia quanto al Parlamento poi a Parigi, aveva benissimo presente quali sarebbero state le implicazioni di questa nuova invenzione nel mondo dell'arte. Che ci sarebbe stata la possibilità di riprodurre oggetti d'arte con grande fedeltà all'originale e soprattutto la possibilità di riprodurne più copie e di avere quindi una grande diffusione dei materiali e della documentazione, molto più facilmente di quanto non fosse stato possibile in passato con il disegno. Le innovazioni apportate all'invenzione ovviamente resero possibile l'uscita dallo studio e quindi la possibilità di fotografare città e pezzi e momenti di vita quotidiana, e quindi la possibilità di documentazione dell'arte e dell'architettura furono avviate e da quel momento non si sono più fermate. In quegli stessi anni o poco dopo l'Unità d'Italia ha avviato un forte dibattito sulla tutela e la conservazione del patrimonio culturale, e quindi non è sfuggito a chi si occupava di questi argomenti, ai primi ministri della pubblica istruzione, direttori generali della Direzione per Antichità e Belle Arti, che accanto alla documentazione del patrimonio culturale, insomma, si doveva capire di che cosa si parlava. Era chiaro che l'Italia avesse un enorme patrimonio culturale, ma era fondamentale capire che cosa questo patrimonio fosse. E accanto quindi alle descrizioni effettuate dal catalogo fu immediatamente evidente che ci fosse la necessità di procedere a una documentazione fotografica sistematica. Devo dire che questo momento aurorale è un momento veramente molto importante che forse non ha mai più visto successivamente delle fasi così felici, e quindi il Ministero della Pubblica Istruzione avvia delle proprie campagne di documentazione di fotografia, e verrà affiancato nel 1895 dal Gabinetto Fotografico Nazionale su iniziativa di Giovanni Gargiolli. È questa l'eredità fondamentale che l'Istituto per il Catalogo conserva in questo momento. Insieme alla produzione interna, fin dall'inizio è stata affiancata l'acquisto e la conservazione di fondi di altri fotografi, e tra la produzione interna e l'acquisto di fondi esterni si è formata questo grande deposito che è la fototeca dell'Istituto Centrale per il Catalogo e la Documentazione. E devo dire che insieme alla volontà di lasciare traccia di oggetti facenti parte del patrimonio, si è voluto anche documentare, e credo che in questo momento sia ancora più importante, altri aspetti legati al patrimonio culturale, come la sua gestione, i restauri. Sono importantissima la collezione, per esempio, che abbiamo di fotografie del Cenacolo, che negli anni ci documentano le vicende conservative, la documentazione di vicende, di momenti traumatici, come per esempio i terremoti, gli incendi, eccetera, e per esempio la difesa delle opere durante la guerra. In questo momento siamo molto impegnati, per esempio, nella gestione e nella comprensione di come gestire gli archivi di studi fotografici o di artisti o di gallerie, perché anche lì la fotografia ci consente di conservare una importantissima memoria storica. Quindi l'azione dello Stato non è soltanto quella di aumentare il numero di fototipi che conserva, ma anche e soprattutto di porsi come regolatore, come stimolo, come pungolo di un'azione di conservazione della fotografia a tutto campo. In queste ultime settimane siamo per esempio impegnati nella definizione delle linee guida per la digitalizzazione delle fotografie e dei materiali audiovisivi, che è uno dei punti essenziali del PNRR, e quindi i tavoli tecnici che produrranno le linee guida sulla gestione del patrimonio fotografico ci vedono impegnati in prima linea. Un altro tema molto importante che in questi ultimi anni abbiamo trattato è quello del censimento delle collezioni fotografiche degli uffici periferici del Ministero. Il Ministero ha prodotto fotografie non soltanto a livello centrale, ma anche in tutti gli uffici periferici. Quello delle soprintendenze è un patrimonio che abbiamo stimato in circa 14 milioni di fototipi, quindi una collezione che documenta il patrimonio culturale italiano dalla fine dell'Ottocento ad oggi, con una ingentissima quantità di materiali. Ma siamo consapevoli anche che non esiste soltanto il patrimonio statale, quindi abbiamo favorito anche il censimento, ed è online, così come è online il censimento dei materiali delle soprintendenze, il censimento degli archivi fotografici in Italia. Questa è un'iniziativa molto importante che consente di far emergere patrimoni non sempre noti e di mantenerne viva la presenza, l'accesso, l'accessibilità. Quindi continuiamo ancora con una certa fatica l'attività del GFN, cercando di documentare il patrimonio culturale nella sua evoluzione. In questo momento l'istituto non ha più fotografi, ma cerchiamo di utilizzare progetti e tutte le occasioni che ci vengono, progetti speciali del Ministero, progetti europei, collaborazione con le università, collaborazione con le scuole, proprio per mantenere viva questa tradizione di documentazione e di accrescimento dei fondi fotografici relativi al patrimonio fotografico. Non ultima l'attività di lavoro con i fotografi contemporanei, con i maestri. Insieme alla fotografia di documentazione stimoliamo anche la produzione di fotografie d'autore, soprattutto sul patrimonio culturale. Abbiamo ampliato la nostra collezione recentemente di quasi 300 fotografie di autori contemporanei, con la consapevolezza che da quando la fotografia ha acquisito un linguaggio, una rilevanza come linguaggio espressivo autonomo, è importante documentare tanto gli oggetti quanto anche l'attività dei grandi fotografi, soprattutto italiani. Quindi si tratta di una serie abbastanza complessa di attività che cerchiamo di gestire contemporaneamente con il supporto di tutti gli uffici del Ministero, dalla Direzione Generale per la Creatività Contemporanea agli uffici per l'UNESCO, per esempio, con i quali collaboriamo recentemente, e proprio con la consapevolezza che non dobbiamo essere un solo istituto, soltanto un istituto di conservazione, ma che l'impegno nel campo della fotografia deve essere un impegno attento anche per l'incremento dei patrimoni e delle conoscenze nell'ambito della fotografia. Questo è il nostro impegno in questo momento. Abbiamo supportato e lavorato nella nascita della nuova collezione alinaria all'interno della regione Toscana e cerchiamo di essere presenti e in qualche modo farci stimolare anche dal confronto con l'università, con le scuole, con le associazioni. Si tratta di un lavoro di accumulazione e valorizzazione, di produzione e di stimolo, soprattutto della creatività italiana, che io spero che in questo momento così difficile non si spengano. Quindi io vi ringrazio per l'invito a questo convegno. La partecipazione e lo stimolo che ci vengono da fuori sono sempre assolutamente importanti, e il confronto con il mondo che pensa è forse una delle cose che ci interessano di più, dei momenti che ci fanno crescere di più. Io pertanto la chiudo qui e vi auguro buon lavoro a tutti. Ringrazio i colleghi che si sono resi disponibili, i colleghi dell'ICCD che si sono resi disponibili per presentare degli studi specifici. Grazie ancora a tutti e buon lavoro.
Penso tocchi a me.
Si sente perfettamente.
Bene, allora procedo. Buonasera. Come direttore regionale Musei della Toscana ringrazio anch'io naturalmente tutti voi partecipanti, gli istituti sia del Ministero che universitari che hanno collaborato alla realizzazione di questo convegno complesso e, come si vede, anche molto partecipato, chiaramente il collega Birrozzi dell'ICCD, l'Università di Firenze Cristiano Giometti, l'Università di Teramo con Paolo Cohen e l'Università di Udine con Donata Levi, quindi tutte persone che ringrazio e che sono qui presenti. E come forse vedete io vi sto parlando dal Palazzo Mozzi-Bardini, che è la sede della Direzione Regionale Musei della Toscana, ma è anche il palazzo storico dove l'antiquario Bardini lavorava, questo era proprio il suo studio tra l'altro, e dove ha raccolto una quantità impressionante di opere, da cui e le ha anche molto vendute, devo dire la verità, però ne sono rimaste veramente tante, e a questa grande collezione di opere, di documenti, di testimonianze, che è coordinata e diretta da Marco Mozzo, che è uno dei collaboratori principali insomma, di questo convegno, che ringrazio, di questa grande collezione, questo grande lavoro, questa grande eredità del Bardini fa parte un importantissimo archivio fotografico. Noi attraverso, anche grazie a un finanziamento che ci viene dal progetto Strategica Fotografia nel 2020 della Direzione Generale Creatività Contemporanea del Ministero della Cultura, stiamo lavorando con Marco appunto in prima linea, Marco Mozzo in prima linea, a prendere, diciamo, conoscenza ancora più approfondita di questo fondo importantissimo, che si collega in maniera poi estremamente articolata, come potete immaginare, con tutto il resto del mondo, perché Bardini all'epoca aveva relazioni. Noi abbiamo anche l'archivio, non solo l'archivio fotografico, anche l'archivio cartaceo che testimonia i fittissimi rapporti che in quegli anni l'antiquario Bardini manteneva con tutto il mondo. Ma rimanendo alla fotografia, sono infiniti i rapporti che dal nostro archivio fotografico si possono ricostruire. Penso solo ai rapporti con gli altri collezionisti, gli antiquari. Per Firenze basta citare l'archivio Berenson piuttosto che l'archivio Longhi, ma insomma le ramificazioni sono infinite. Quindi questo è il motivo per cui come direzione regionale dei musei e come addirittura avendo sede proprio in questo palazzo, dietro il muro che è davanti a me c'è l'archivio Bardini, per cui l'archivio delle collezioni Bardini, quindi siamo molto molto vicini a questa storia così importante. Io non posso fare altro che ringraziare innanzitutto di nuovo Marco Mozzo, ma anche gli altri colleghi della direzione regionale dei musei che hanno partecipato. Vi sarà anche un intervento di Barbara Arbeid sull'archivio del museo archeologico, perché tra l'altro, come voi sapete, la nascita delle direzioni regionali musei, che ha messo insieme provenienze, siti museali e uffici provenienti da altre precedenti istituzioni, fa sì che noi poi mettiamo insieme una serie di archivi, tra cui per esempio quello importantissimo del Museo Archeologico Nazionale di Firenze, che vanno gestiti e vanno conosciuti. Quindi l'attività è molto ampia, molto complessa. Naturalmente puntiamo molto anche noi sul PNRR, che Carlo Birrozzi ha citato, sperando di riuscire, diciamo, a rientrare con i progetti che stiamo predisponendo. Per quanto riguarda questo convegno, lo seguirò, diciamo, ex post, perché immediatamente dopo vi dovrò salutare e lasciare, perché il Green Pass, come dire, incombe, ma sarà mia assoluto interesse di poter recuperare, per fortuna, tramite le piattaforme, interventi, e quindi non mi resta veramente altro che ringraziare tutti e augurarvi buon lavoro e naturalmente invitarvi anche qui a Firenze. È stata citata Firenze come esempio, diciamo che ne siamo abbastanza consapevoli, e questo palazzo è anche un luogo che nel tempo ancora non è entrato proprio nel circuito, siamo relativamente da poco insediati in questo luogo molto importante per la città di Firenze, e potrà essere anche in futuro uno dei centri per la consultazione certamente, ma anche l'attivazione di attività, di funzioni culturali legate certamente alla eredità Bardini, e quindi di conseguenza tutte le ramificazioni che, come dicevo prima, è possibile istituire da questa enorme eredità: fotografie, archivi, opere d'arte di tutte le tipologie. E quindi è un lavoro che stiamo portando avanti con grande impegno, ma con grande difficoltà, viste le quantità immense di opere e di oggetti e di testimonianze che ci sono state lasciate da questa figura così importante per la città di Firenze in generale, per la storia dell'antiquariato, dell'artigianato e del commercio dell'arte tra 8 e 900. Quindi buon lavoro a tutti e grazie.
Cristiano, vai tu?
Va bene, Donata, grazie. Welcome everybody. I am Cristiano Giometti and I wish to thank Direttore Stefano Cascio and Direttore Marco Birrozzi for their speeches. We are starting our conference with an opening speech by Costanza Caraffa from the Fototeca of the Conti Storici Institute in Florence. Costanza Caraffa will speak about increasing value, photographs and art market. And I'm very pleased to give her the opening speech, which is very important for us. Thank you, Costanza.
Thank you, Cristiano, and thank you to everybody. Can you hear me? Okay.
Perfectly.
Perfectly.
So I don't know if the definition of opening speech is the right one for my paper. Actually, I'm not going to speak extensively about the use of photographs in the art market. You are the experts. In the same time, I try to share my screen. Share. Just a moment. Okay. Okay.
Okay, we are seeing it. Okay.
And I go. I think you are now seeing my PowerPoint.
Perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. I don't see you, so please tell me. So speak if I have to take care of something. I don't know. Again, I don't know if opening speech is a good definition for my paper. I'm actually going to share with you some thoughts on photographs, archives, and the production of value. And I have to apologize for my voice. I hope that it will last until the end. My own thoughts are very much indebted to my exchange with some colleagues during the last years. And so I shall start with some acknowledgements, although acknowledgements normally belong to the closing remarks of a lecture. One of the projects in which I was active was Photo Object. You just see the book as our last outcome. And of course, I had a lot of exchange with the staff and my own colleagues at the Photothèque of the Connoisseurs Institute in Florence. And in these two constellations, I had the opportunity to experiment together with others the everyday collective handling of photographs in archives, and that very much shaped my thoughts. And the study day that we organized together with the Fondazione Zeri in 2017, and also with Giovanna Capitelli of the Università della Calabria was already mentioned. It gave rise to a publication in the Mitteilungen des Kunsthistorisches Institutes in Florence that I edited with Julia Bernikhausen. It is really too bad that Julia Bernikhausen could not be here today. Last but not least, I would like to mention my collaboration with Armin Linke and Estelle Blaschke, and especially their project Image Capital that develops around the notion of photography as currency. And I will use some installation views of Armin's and Estelle's exhibition Image Capital displayed in Stuttgart in 2019 as kind of illustration of some of my reflections. Photography and market have always been inseparable. The procurement of raw materials and the development of an artisanal, later industrial production of chemical components, glass plates, negative films, paper, and cameras are constituents of the photography complex from the first hour. And here I could mention a book, Photography and the Marketplace, edited by Kelly Wilder, research by Monica Bravo on the traffic of silver and its connections to photography in the 19th century, and many other studies that are currently on the course to be done. Karl Marx already acknowledged photography as one of the then emerging forms of production. Starting with the dispute between Daguerre and Talbot about the paternity of photography, the need to commercialize the images and processes experimented by the pioneers gave immediately rise to patents and copyright issues. Photographers became entrepreneurs too, and from one-man shops, real industries developed, with Alinari, already mentioned, as a well-known example. With the introduction of its cheap and easy-to-use technologies, Kodak, produced a large-scale market for amateur photographers parallel to the professional market. The commercial exploitation of photographs led to the development of sophisticated archiving systems that allowed the right images to be retrieved for the right client. The business of photography, to quote the title of an important conference organized by Kelly Wilder in Leicester a couple of years ago, is a form of collective labor in which different professional roles, among them the archivist, but not only the archivist, are involved. The various business models had to be adapted over time, as in the case of the Bettman Corbis archive, on which there is research, among others, by Estelle Blaschke. New digital technologies impose new forms of image commodification. All these aspects were already put on a list in 1983 by photographer and writer Alan Sekula in his seminal essay, Photography Between Labor and Capital. Some 100 years after Karl Marx, Sekula explored, I quote, the relationship between photographic culture and economic life. So the topic of this book was the archive of a photographic studio in a coal mining region in Canada. And Sekula analyzes the traffic in photographs, to quote the title of another essay by him of 1981, from a materialist perspective. He points that the ways in which photography constructs an imaginary economy should be one of the aims of photography studies. And he declares his interest in the question how photography works in everyday life in advanced industrial societies. And now we could replace industrial society with digital or post-digital society. Furthermore, Sekula points to the, I quote again, continuing need to validate photography as a fine art. And he suggests that actually photographers are detail workers when they are not artists or amateurs. He questions the romantic myth of authorship, uniqueness, and originality, values that are common to the museum system, the fine arts market, and the history of art as a discipline. And he also argues that actually the photographer's first work, I quote him again, involved a negotiation between his own craft and the demands and expectations of his clients. So it is impossible to separate his own craft, the own work of the photographer, from the demand and expectations of his clients. And if the photographer is an artist, in quotation marks, or not, or if he's just detail worker in the world of the cultural production. One of the other points that are interesting to Sekula, I quote him again, is how to read the making and reception of ordinary pictures. And this is, I think, a very important point for this workshop. It is not necessary to discover new artists or new works of art, but we are just looking for what Nina Lager-Westberg calls the archival value of our materials. And again, back to Sekula, he is interested in the instrumental realism of the industrial photographs and in the sentimental realism of the family photograph. And this is also an important point because effects are always connected to photography, and it is also in this case impossible to separate a simple pragmatic, realistic, industrial level of the photographic production and an affective level. And finally, Sekula denunciates a tendency to the depoliticization of a photographic meaning, arguing that no archive is neutral or innocent. Another milestone very close to us temporarily is Paul Frosch with his essay on photography as cultural industry that was published in 2020. Frosch insists on the economic and symbolic organization of photographic labor, as well as on the significance of standardization and innovation up to the processes of remediation and datification in digital cultural production. A market-related phenomenon, too, is the discovery of photographic materials in storage that were until then anonymous, with the subsequent canonization of individual personalities as artists. Think of Vivian Maier or Seydou Keita. I assume that you know the stories. Vivian Maier was a nanny working in Chicago and New York, and almost at her death, the negatives that she accumulated photographing in the streets of Chicago and New York came in the hands of a collector and a dealer because Vivian Maier couldn't pay the storage space anymore in which these photographs that were meant for her and not for a museum or for the public were stored. And this pursuit, she died a couple of years later, and this produced legal fight and several publications and film and so on. And in any case, the canonization of Vivian Maier as a photographer. And I don't want, Seydou Keita, the Malian photographer, has a similar story. I don't want to question that these two are incredible photographers. I just want to point to what Alan Sekula again called the current fever to assimilate photography into the discourse and market of the fine arts. The creation of value through photography occurs also in non-monetary terms. The wide adoption of photographs already in the second half of the 19th century for documentation and as evidence in the humanities and sciences was grounded on the presumed truth value of the chemical-mechanical process. Photographs functioned as currency and exchange objects between scholars, and there is a famous quote by Panofsky who said, who has the most photos wins. And this is also important for archives to have more photos. The stories of Alinari and Kodak demonstrate how difficult it has become to translate images into capital, to paraphrase again the title of Estelle Blaschke's and Armin Linke's art research project, Image Capital. As we have seen, one of the possible ways to approach the question of the relationship between photography, art, and market is to turn to fine art photography. And the question, I quote, how an art photographer will perform as an investment. This is a quote from a manual on photography as fine art for collectors and dealers. The fine art photography market can be seen as a branch of the art market and is based on the economic and symbolic value of art photographs as collector's items, progressively and laboriously acquired over a century and a half. To be considered fine art, a photograph must have a recognized author. Here, the art market shares the value system of museums, which is strongly conditioned by the art historical concepts of authorship and uniqueness. This also corresponds to the labor organization in the cultural industry of photography, which is dominated by the freelance photographer rather than by photographers integrated in corporations. And his individual imprint of the photographer is seen as the true source of cultural value. I'm quoting here again Paul Frosch. The disappearance of the labor of photography, as denunciated among others by Geoffrey Betchen, has indeed been furthered by exhibitions in art museum as well as art historical publications that tend to select photographs as pure images attributable to an author artist without providing any information on the technique, dimensions, their often commercial production context, or the many professionals involved. This tension between romantic aesthetic and industrial commercial values, between quantity and singularity, and here I'm quoting again Paul Frosch, is a central issue. Now, photographs circulating and producing value in the visual economy of art history are often masses of anonymous, apparently insipid, dusty multiple copies. We are speaking about so-called documentary photographs, which since the middle of the 19th century are being used to classify, preserve, compare, and study works of art and monuments. And here I'm just focusing on European and North American art historical practices. This use of photographs fueled the growth of commercial studios and mass production by firms such as Alinari. The number of photographs in private and institutional collections soon became the unit of measure of their importance. The photographic archives that started to arise in the last third of the 19th century, nowadays complemented by digital image collections, are among the places where the canon of art history is constantly formed and transformed. Just as photographs are shaped by collective labor and meaning-making, so are archives and collections, where economic decisions meet monetary, logistic, political, and epistemic questions. In those archives, photographs create value in the sense that they sanction the inclusion of a given work in the canon. The hierarchies of art history are implicit in photoarchival classification systems. Moving within an archive from one box to another for a photograph often means an upgrade, for instance, the inclusion in a special collection. Above you see our collection called Cimelia Fotografica, or a downgrade, for instance, from the box Leonardo to the box School of Leonardo. Yet, among the current users of art historical photo archives, such as the Fototeca of the Kunsthistorisches Institut in Florence, are also art dealers. They come to us together with art historians and photography scholars. The photographic archive is quasi the place where art historians and art dealers meet. On the art market too, photographs do a work. They serve as communication tools between dealers and customers, as well as visual inventories in the internal archives of auction houses and galleries. But they have also been used to vehicle the credibility of forgeries. The photographic documentations of the art objects on trade functioned as lexical representation of the artworks themselves, but also as operative images that were integral in art market transactions. And here I am quoting in the sense that I am showing some photographic objects that are part of the project by Julia Bernikhausen in our Fototheque about the Galleria San Giorgi and photography and the art market. This is precisely your task in this conference, to analyze the photographic and archival practices of art dealers and collectors. My suggestion is that you take into consideration as a theoretical and methodological framework a broader reflection on photographs, archives, and value based on the material approach in photography and archive studies. Moreover, I propose to embrace Terry Cook's intellectual paradigm for archives, which shifts the focus from information to knowledge. Cook argues that the images, inscriptions, stamps, codes, and all the traces of the usage and consumption of the photographs over time are not just a combination of textual and visual information. They rather give us an insight into the knowledge system of art trade, art history, and photography themselves. And here I will go on with some words on the status of photographs and photo archives in current research. The interest in photo archives as dynamic spaces has its roots in the work by critics such as Alan Sekula and John Tegg, but it literally exploded with the archival and material turn of the last decades. Many art market scholars are fully aware of the material approach in general. However, there is still ample scope for the acknowledgement of photographs as material objects. In many publications and online databases, reproductions of single photographs are often cropped and viewed merely indexically as a reference to their visual content, the art objects whose location, provenance, or state of conservation may be in question. And here you see...
Un momento, prego, scusatemi Costanza, un attimo. Prego il dottor Tartuferi di smettere di presentare perché in questo momento sta presentando la collega Caraffa. Se puoi di nuovo ripresentare, Costanza, scusami.
Ok, so stop, devo fare stop sharing e far ripartire?
Sì, esatto.
Okay.
Questo è quello che risulta a me. Non so gli altri, ma a me risulta questo.
Ok, vediamo se riesco a farlo senza farvi perdere troppo tempo.
Perfetto, perfetto adesso.
Ok, ecco, ora però è andato indietro. Ero arrivata qua. C'eravate arrivati anche voi?
Ottimo,
Okay.
ottimo adesso.
So you see the website of the Center for the Study of the Art and Antiques Market in Leeds, but I could have taken many other examples. What usually disappears are the photographs' material qualities and institutional histories. These are, however, essential to the very same research objectives. Versos are usually annotated with information on artworks, expert evaluations, price estimations, and addresses of clients, all data. The mounting, for instance, on cardboard, but also the choice of photographic technique, economical albumen prints or aesthetically pleasing but pricey silver gelatin prints, reflect the bureaucratic workflows of art-dealing businesses. Photographs are often manipulated before they enter an auction catalog. Numbers, stamps, and cross-references provide information on the photographs' itineraries within a dealer's archive, but also on their archival histories as part of institutionalization processes. It is at the interlacement of images and data that value is created. The material approach in photography studies aims at overcoming the traditional reduction of photographs to their visual content. It developed since the end of the last century at the intersection between visual anthropology and material culture studies. Photographs as material objects exist, circulate, mutate, and are active in space and time, in changing social and cultural contexts. What is valuable here is not only the visual content. Archives, too, are no longer just seen as places of discipline and power, but also as vital and dynamic conglomerates. Ecosystems founded on the balance and interaction between various species, the photographs themselves, card mounts, stamps, boxes, inventory books, catalogs, the structures and practices of the photographic archive, and the people involved in its activities, from archivists to scholars. The material approach enables us to go beyond the usual hierarchies of photographic values based on authorship and uniqueness. It has shifted attention to the masses of often anonymous photographs preserved in documentary archives and allows them to be regarded as parts of networks connected to the selling of art. Indeed, networks of international art trade are not only formed by people such as antiquarians, collectors, and photographers. Photographs themselves need also to be recognized as essential to these networks, to the formation of the art historical canon, as well as to the transactions that lead to the creation of monetary and cultural value in the art market. And speaking about value, I show you the same photograph that I showed before, put as an exhibition object in the exhibition Unboxing Photographs that was organized in 2018 in Berlin. And here the aim was not to put a photograph from an archive in a museum to musealize it and declare it as a work of art, but to put the archive in the museum, to unbox the photographic boxes and put these objects as archival objects in an exhibition. And this has to do with the cycle of economic and symbolic value production. Gatherings, oh, mamma mia. Such as our workshop in 2017 and this webinar rise from the acknowledgement that there is a considerable amount of partly unpublished original research material related to the use of photography in the art market. And there is still a lot of basic research to be done. There is a long series of open research issues, starting with the question of the authenticity and originality of artworks and photographs. In dealing with such questions, I argue we have the opportunity to rethink the relationship between two apparently conflicting notions of photography: photographs as historical documents versus photographs as aesthetic objects. This contraposition was already criticized by Alan Sekula. Photographs are always both, and actually much more. The aim of our research, as mentioned above, should not be the rediscovery of new photographers as artists, or of hitherto ignored photographs as works of art. However, neither should it be the mere emergence of new sources and documents for art market studies. Elizabeth Edwards suggested to go even a step further, considering photographs not only sources or resources, but rather resourceful. Moreover, the investigation of the photographic modes of profit creation on the art market aims to impact on a wider discussion about the hierarchies of photographic and archival values. At the end, a general reassessment of the value of photographs and photographic archives in research and society, able to overcome what Paul Frosch called the residual power of literary artistic models of authorship, is only possible if we understand the economic and symbolic mechanisms of photographic value formation and transformation. And this is, of course, related also to the value of our own photographic archives. And here I'm speaking as the head of one of such archives, and not only as a researcher working with photographs in photographic archives. I would like to conclude very briefly with an insight into a project that I worked on together with Armin Linke. The book is just hot off the press, and it has to do with the already mentioned Alinari. On Alinari, Archive in Transition is a project that accompanied the transition of the archive of the famous photographic firm from the old headquarters of the company to a storage facility in Calenzano, when in 2019 the Alinari archive was acquired by the Regione Toscana. And this is, of course, an incredible opportunity to approach the issue of photographic values from many, many, many different points of view. I will just touch upon some of them. With Armin Linke, we were in the storage facility in Calenzano for a photographic campaign. And in Linke's photographs and video stills, the reinforced concrete architecture of the storage facility, the massive climate control and fire prevention systems, the huge armored doors, all speak to the intrinsic and symbolic values of the Alinari heritage, both intrinsic and symbolic. In the vault, that is even more protected, we see boxes containing the most valuable materials, because I have to remember that the holdings of Alinari include the company archive, other photographic archives, and also a museum level collection. Another level on which to speak about value, if we consider the recent history of Alinari, is the fact that the entire archive was declared of historical value by the Soprintendenza Archivistica e Bibliografica della Toscana, and the book includes some interviews that Armin Linke did, in this case with Maria Francesca Stamuli and Lorenzo Valgimogli, but many of the people who are in the audience and are participating to this conference were involved in this process that involved, for instance, also ICCD and the institutions of the Ministero. And Stamuli and Valgimolli had overseen the process leading to the declaration of the entire Alinari archive's historical value that was completed in 2018. And in the interview, they say, I quote, "Opening a room and not being able to enter it since it is completely filled with boxes of Alinari photographs was enlightening. The job of cataloging, of surveying the heritage materialized there." So the quantity, the quality, the value of something that is stored in boxes, not accessible, but exactly these huge masses of boxes suggest in the space of the storage facility that it has an incredible value. The financial transaction was conducted by the Regione Toscana in the person of Paolo Pantuliano, who was director of the Heritage and Logistics Department of the Regione. He's now the Director General of the Regione Toscana, and was based on the declaration of historical value by the Soprintendenza, but also on a complicated procedure of assessing and inspecting the heritage in the various phases of the transaction that was concluded in December 2020 with the acquisition of the digital assets that are connected to the licensing activities that were of the old Alinari and also of the new Alinari as a public institution. And Pantuliano said in the interview that he was, I quote, aware of the cultural wealth of this heritage, the history and culture of our city, our country, and the entire world are stored here. And there is also a personal and affective moment in the stories reported by former Alinari collaborators at different levels. So the Alinari has a huge potential to break it exactly in this particular moment of transition. We all hope that the boxes will be available, will be unboxed very soon in the new headquarters of the newly founded Fondazione Alinari per la Fotografia, and that we all will be able to consult and study these materials. But it is exactly this transitional moment that has the potential to break the traditional hierarchy between the photograph as a work of art. And here we have another level, the photographs by Armin Linke, and the photograph as a document, and between museum values and archive values. And I hope that these thoughts and reflections can be inspiring for you during the conference. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much to Costanza for her interesting and very rich paper. We touched some of the key points of our conference, like photographic culture and economic life, archival values, and fine arts photography market. She touched all these points and many others, of course, like the Alinari project, which is very important for Tuscany, but not only, which is in process at the Connoisseurs Institute. And I wish to thank her very much and hope she will stay with us all the afternoon to be part of our discussion at the end of this session. And now I'm going to open the first session of our conference, whose title is Tools and Practices: Art Dealers, Auction Houses, Collectors, and Connoisseurs. And the first of our guests is Darius Spieth, from the professor of art history at the University of Louisiana State. I wish to thank Darius for he had to wake up very early to be with us, and so I'm very grateful for this sacrifice. Darius will give a paper whose title is The Transition from Print to Photography in Auction Catalogs, a Long Historical Perspective. Thank you, Darius, please.
Yes, hello. Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Let me just get this on the screen here. Okay. Yes. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you, Darius.
Okay. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, this afternoon. I am going to talk about a subject that I've been investigating over the last year or so, which is the issue of the appearance of photographs in auction house catalogs. And there's one preliminary remark that I wanted to make. We would think that the invention of photography will kind of open the floodgates, and it's an instantaneous process that everybody will embrace this new technology immediately, but that's not the case. As a matter of fact, it kind of took almost all of the second half of the 19th century for this new technology really to catch on. And for that, one needs to understand the evolution of photography in general. And I wanted to preface this presentation with one remark, and that's an amazing find that I made in the archives in Paris, the first date that a photograph was sold at auction. And it actually predates the first appearance of photographs in printed matter. That happened on January 11th, 1847. The people who sold these two sets of daguerreotypes there were actually themselves involved in the invention of photography. I interpret this in my forthcoming book as an experiment, as an attempt to launch this medium and to see how it will do in an auction context. But in any case, these are daguerreotypes, and daguerreotypes, as you probably all know, are one-of-a-kind images. They cannot be reproduced. They do not lend themselves to reproduction in books or in photographs. And the breakthrough here, of course, came a little bit later with Fox Talbot in Great Britain, and that is also photography, but it's a different type of photography because it is based on the positive-negative process where you have glass slides and then you can make an infinite number of reproductions from one negative, and that's, of course, the technical precondition for photographs to be reproduced in printed matter of whatever type. And we also need to be aware of the technical constraints of photography once this process gets started. So we need to make a distinction, for instance, between actual photographs mounted on cardstock, and the presentation that came before actually showed some examples here. For auction houses, for auction house catalogs, that's a problem because it means that illustrations are inserted into catalogs, and that means that they can get lost easily. So that's a real problem for doing research, as a matter of fact. And then later on, you have actual photographs printed in the catalogs with the photogravure process, but that does not come about overnight. That's a long, drawn-out process that takes several decades. There's also the problem of the cost quality, right? Early photographs are very expensive. And we need to keep that in mind. There's also a mentality issue in the sense that early photographers were seen as kind of descendants, relatives of printmakers, and so making reproductions was seen as an art form themselves. The photogravures, early photogravures, were kind of unstable. They could rub off. They had all kinds of technical problems. But I think the most important problem for auction house catalogs in particular is the issue that there's a very quick turnaround, right? And to do this requires more time, and that was a constraint. Anyhow, the upshot is photographs are slow to appear in auction house catalogs. They appeared first in books, and also we have the phenomenon of hybrid catalogs that combined early photographic reproductions with etchings, wood engravings, and lithographs. I'm going to show you in just a second the auction house catalogs of Anatoly Demidov, the Prince of San Donato, and actually, being here in Florence, of course, is the right kind of setting to talk about that. I'll also take it into the 20th century, and I'll talk about the moment when photographs became routinely contained in auction house catalogs, and how that coincided with the advent of modern avant-garde art appearing in the art market with the sales of Jacques Doucet, the Peau de l'Ours, and the Degas sale by the end of the 19-teens, just after World War I, right? So in any case, there's also one special kind of situation that affects photographs of paintings. Paintings are very difficult to photograph because of reflections, issues with color translation, especially red, and therefore, initially, surprisingly, most photographs as reproductions of artworks focused on prints, decorative arts, but only with some delay on paintings. So before I get into the auction house catalogs, just one very quick remark here about the appearance of photographic reproductions in books or book-like publications. And the trailblazer here was the Imprimerie Photographique in Lille by Louis-Désiré Blancard-Évrard, that put out, starting in the early 1850s, these photographic albums. And some of them kind of morphed into the very first photographically illustrated art history books. And in particular, Charles Blanc's L'œuvre de Rembrandt stands out here. It continues, reproduit par la photographie, so photographed, photographic reproductions of a catalogue raisonné of Rembrandt prints. And of course, Rembrandt was very, very popular in the 19th century and into the early 20th century. So, but the point is, these were prints. Here on the left-hand side, you see the photographic reproduction by Blancard-Évrard of the famous 100 guilder prints. Just as an example, it also shows you the technical limitations. When it comes to the art market, a breakthrough was the Œuvre de Paul Delaroche photographiée par Bingham And that was a publication that came out in 1858, sponsored by Goupil and Company. Now, Goupil, perhaps most of us know Goupil as the employer of Vincent van Gogh when he was young, famous art dealer in Paris, of course, with galleries in other major cities. And Goupil was also a trailblazer of using photographs to promote contemporary art. Here's an example of della painting. The sons of Edward, about to be executed, Lamoyant scene of a kind of academic art. In any case, this gives you a flavor how these early reproduced photographers would look like. And later on, actually, Goupil had his own factory for photographs where these were manufactured outside of Paris at Asnières. And so he really pushed contemporary artists with this. Later on, Ari Scheffer and Jerome, of course, right? Jerome, that's a big topic also to discuss, but perhaps not here. Jerome and Photography, very interesting. The work was prefaced by Henri de Laborde, who was actually more on the Baudelairean side in the sense that he kind of despised photography. But in any case, the photographer who did this work is also an interesting character because he was a photographer documenting world fairs who came from England, Crystal Palace exhibition and then the Universal exhibition in Paris, 1855. So that's where he comes from. Now, before we get into photographic reproductions in auction house catalogs, one quick preliminary remark about prints in auction house catalogs before the invention of photography, before 1850. And to our surprise, there are very, very, very few catalogs from, let's say, 1700 until 1850 that actually have printed reproductions. The convention was that, let's say you have a famous collection, the owner of that collection may commission the reproduction of these artworks by printmakers in the form of etchings or line engravings or what have you, and this would be published, and then with some delay, the collection would appear on the market, and the catalog would refer back to these reproductive prints that were produced on other occasions. But you do not have the idea of using prints, etchings, as a means to reproduce artworks so that the potential buyers can see that and that they are kind of enticed to bid on these works, to buy these works, right? And so we have some 30,000 catalogs that were published before 1860, but only a handful of them have illustrations. Here's some examples. The Neiman sale that came from Amsterdam to Paris in 1776 is an exception. Oddly enough, a sale that focuses on drawings. There's another example from the early 19th century in Paris, the Léon Defourny sale, and there's on the right a reproduction of a Poussin from that sale. That's a line engraving, and these line engravings, wood engravings, would also become popular over the course of the 19th century. In any case, the very first photographically illustrated auction catalog is an oddity because it is a collaboration between Germany and England. It was a sale that happened in March 1860 of the so-called Viennese Technical Museum in Frankfurt that contained objects that were allegedly originally collected by Habsburg emperors such as Rudolf II and Maximilian I. There was probably more like a sprinkling of these objects, and these were all objects that comprised things like chalices, crucifixes, ivory carvings, majolica works, animal objects, reliquaries, objets de vertu, and of course, this is the great moment here of a revival style. So lots of haute époque objects that in some form or another refers back to the Middle Ages and the Gothic period or the Renaissance. And here again, what is important is that these were not paintings that we're looking at. We're looking at reproductions of three-dimensional objects. Interestingly enough, the photographs were made in Frankfurt by a photographer who was also mostly known as a photographer of architectural monuments, Hermann Emden. And all of the photographs that appear in this catalog are inscribed not only with the provenance of this Löwenstein collection in the Viennese Museum in Frankfurt, but also with the name of the photographer who made them. And then the question becomes, was this made in Frankfurt? Probably so. Was it only the glass negatives that were made there and then shipped to England for reproduction? I don't know. I have a suspicion that all of the photographs were manufactured in Germany, but in any case, that's a difficult issue. The interesting thing is also the provenance of these objects is presented as a museum. As a matter of fact, the owners, the direct owners who brought this collection to the market, the Löwenstein brothers, Abraham and Markus Löwenstein, were kind of gem dealers, and this was probably more part of their stock. So the photographs were definitely part of marketing this collection as a museum. The arrangement of the objects is museum-like, if you want, right? And so in any case, painting is a kind of latecomer to this game. And here I'm showing you the first photographic reproductions of paintings in auction catalogs in Paris. And interestingly enough, there's a clear and distinct focus on Rococo paintings, as you can tell. The first one was a François Boucher painting today in the Louvre, the Abduction of Venus, sold on May 10th, 1867. There was basically only 3 paintings in the sale, and this photograph was an insert. Now, I could not find the actual photograph, and what you see here, this shadowy kind of thing on the left, is probably more of an imprint of the ink on the covering page, right? That's the problem. As I said, so many of these early illustrations were inserts, and the inserts got lost over time. So another sale of Rococo artworks happened in 1868, when there was this pair of Jean-Baptiste Pater Rococo paintings sold again in Paris at the request of a Cologne banker named Abraham Schaffhausen. And there we do have an example here on the right. This gives you a sense of the quality, the shortcomings of the quality. Obviously, there's something going on with the contrast here, you know, and it kind of has the appearance of being out of focus. So in any case, that's how good we'll get by the late 1860s, and they are far and few between. So the another interesting thing about the Pater painting is that when it was sold at auction with the illustrations in 1868, it brought 87,500 francs in a catalog that was illustrated, and then the buyer, the Marquis Maison, died shortly thereafter. It came to the market again a year later, was not illustrated, but brought more money. In the instance when it was not illustrated, brought 100,000 francs. So does that actually mean that illustrations do not make a difference, or is it so that in fact the first time that these objects were illustrated resonated with people and they remembered it, and hence it enhanced the status of that? Again, a lot of emphasis on Rococo here for early photographic reproductions of the late 19th century, and that has a lot to do, of course, with the Rococo revival that was fueled by the Goncourt brothers about this time. So now I wanted to talk very briefly about hybrid catalogs, the Anatole Demidov sales. Lots of these sales between 1868 and 1880, kind of culminating in the 1880 catalog. This was a sale then that happened in Paris, in Florence, lots of applied arts, a good sprinkling of Netherlandish 18th century art, Rococo paintings, lots of contemporary art. Paul Delaroche appears again. So this type of objects that appear in these early catalogs for which photography was used is clearly defined. The New York Times even reported about it, calling the Demidov collection the result of an enormous wealth and an untrained eye. So you know, the best of the best, the most expensive stuff that money could buy. And they put an enormous amount of effort into these catalogs, especially the 1880 catalog. They even called upon the director of the art magazine La, named Léon Gaucheret, who was a pupil of Viollet-le-Duc, who was, of course, at the center of the medieval revival movement around this time. And they had this whole army of draftsmen, etchers, engravers, photographers to do this 400-page catalog, and about 2,000 lots and 300 illustrations. And what we find, especially in the 1880 catalog, is a clear distinction. When you have paintings, they use etchings for reproduction. When they have decorative objects, they use wood engravings. Look at this table here on the right-hand side. This is not a photograph. You may think it's a photograph. It's a wood engraving, and they used it also for textiles, anything that has a texture. And very, very few photographers, interestingly enough, these two character hats by Greuze that you see down below, these were photographs. The photographs were unsigned, whereas the wood engravings, the etchings, including here the famous astronomer Bergeret Douw, were signed by the printmaker, by the reproductive artist. And all things considered, the San Donato catalogs really reflect the sentiment of Baudelaire, who, as you may know, was an enemy of photography. He thought that photography destroyed art, right, made them vulgar and so on. And so they thought, when they were catering to this top end of the market, you could not have these vulgar photographs. You needed to have something more distinct, which is actually etchings or, failing that, wood engravings. And yet at the same time in Paris we see a real improvement. At the same time as the Demidov sales go on, for instance, we have the sale of the Hotel Grimont de la Reynière, which is today's the embassy of the United States, near the Place de la Concorde, and they are selling all of the furnishings that are inside, and they call upon a photographer who's an architectural photographer who's also photographing the Eiffel Tower when it was built, Charles Garnier's Opera House when it was built, and the quality is excellent. Now, and this photographer, Louis-Émile Durandel, actually signed his photographs. Another landmark was the sale of the collection of the son of the dealer Adolphe Goupil, who died relatively early on. Albert Goupil, who was a photographer, accompanied Jerome during his expeditions in the Near East in 1868, had a big collection of kind of Oriental artworks, and there was a wonderful catalog with photographic reproductions in 1888 done by the photographic presses of his father, of the company Bousseau, Valadon and Company, that was actually part of the Goupil Gallery empire. Moving forward here, about 1900, shortly after 1900, photographs really become common coin for illustrations of auction house catalogs. Two examples here from 1909. Félix Doistot, who was a liquor salesman outside of Paris, big collector of Boucher, Fragonard. 50% of the lots in his catalog were photographically illustrated through photographers. Again, other example, an Egyptian banker and entrepreneur, Raphael Suarez, who financed the Assuan Dam, right? He had a villa in the Bois de Boulogne, very good furniture, kind of Rococo, neo-Rococo stuff mixed in with contemporary paintings. 20% of all lots illustrated. For the paintings, half of the lots were illustrated. That's significant. Another breakthrough here is Jacques Doucet, very famous collector, probably the best Rococo collection ever assembled. And he had a change of mind in 1912. He got rid of all of the Rococo stuff and instead started to buy Cubism. Picasso, Braque, Matisse, modern furniture, Elaine Gray, Pierre Legrand, etc. And so in 1912, he got rid of all of his Rococo art, and there was a fully illustrated catalog, which we see on the left. So this is Jacques Doucet's apartment before and after. Rococo, neo-Rococo, and then modernism, avant-garde, right? So it's the last hooray of Rococo. And the interesting thing is that, of course, you know, by this point in time, photography will really focus on modern art and will become a promoter of modern art. And we see this here in the Peau de l'Ours sale, the first time that 20th century avant-garde art will make an appearance at public auctions. And this is what we would call a closed investment fund for art that was launched by somebody named André Level, right? And so he assembles a bunch of investors and he bought Picassos and so on. And in 1914, just a few weeks before the outbreak of World War I, they have the set date for selling their investment. This fund, this group of paintings, a total of 145 lots, Van Goghs, Gauguins, Picassos, Matisses, Marie-Laurencins, Van Dongens, Utrillos, right? And 16 of these lots, 145 lots, were illustrated on 14 plates, including 2 Picassos, very famous Picassos. So clearly, from the get-go, this is the first auction really that focuses exclusively on modern contemporary art, and photography is part of it from the get-go. and the Degas sale, 1918, after World War I, right? Degas had died. He was a big-time art collector. There's the sale in multiple catalogs, and the photographs become the catalogs themselves. The description is reduced to captions under the catalogs. All of Degas' own artworks, paintings, drawings, even the prints, everything is illustrated. Some 1,600 photographs in total, and the sales catalog becomes almost a catalog raisonné. Interesting difference to the Jacques Doucet catalog. In the case of the Jacques Doucet catalog, they kept the edition size down. They didn't want this catalog to circulate widely. And with the Degas sale, it was the opposite. This catalog was distributed everywhere, and you can still find many, many copies everywhere, right? So now we're moving into the 1920s, and the interesting thing, not every sale was always illustrated with photographs. Even in 1923, when Sarah Bernard died, this is the cover of her auction catalog with a painting of her by her favorite painter, Georges Clairin, which was not even included in the sale. This was more an illustration. That's the only illustration you have, this painting on the cover. But the Bernard sale is important because it's one of the very first auction sales photographically documented for the press, as you can see in the example on the right. And I wanted to conclude with a remark about the 1930s. Of course, by the 1930s, photographic reproductions in auction house catalogs were the standard, so to speak. And here's some examples. So even the new arrivals on the auction scene of African or oceanic art were now illustrated. This is a 1931 catalog of a sale organized by André Breton and Paul Éluard in Paris, and you see all of these African oceanic objects, most of them, right, very significant part, 1/3 of the lots illustrated, but in a true surrealist fashion. It's all out of order, right? The numbering system, the appearance in the photographs and the appearance in the catalog do not match. I also wanted to mention very briefly the infamous sale of Degenerate Art that happened in Lucerne, Switzerland, with the Gallery Fischer, of artworks such as the famous self-portrait of Vincent van Gogh that we see here, right? And this catalog too was extensively illustrated through photographs. So photographs have become common coin, definitely, by the 1920s and 1930s. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, and I hope I did keep the time frame here. I can stop sharing. Is that all right?
That's fine. Thank you very much, Darius, for your paper, illustrating with so many details and examples the slow but gradual establishment of photography in auction catalogs. It reminds me of the catalog of exhibition that till the 20s and 30s didn't have pictures of the works exhibited very often. And so it's very similar, the path of the two different auction catalogs and exhibition catalogs. Before starting with Paul Tucker, I want to remember to our audience in YouTube that they can ask questions to our speakers, writing an email to the address that is running beneath the screen. The address is photograph.art.market@gmail.com. And now we go to Paul Tucker, my colleague at the University of Florence, who is going to speak about photography, connoisseurship, and art market in the career of Charles Fairfax Murray. He's studying Charles Fairfax Murray since a long time and is going to present the result of part of his research. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. I've shared my screen. I hope you can see that.
Perfectly.
Okay. Thank you very much, Cristiano, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to take part in this conference. This paper will consider the use made of photographs by the English artist, connoisseur, and dealer Charles Fairfax Murray, exploring his role in their creation and circulation and aiming to give some account of what is known to remain of his extensive but largely dispersed photographic archive. First, though, who was Murray? He was born in Bow, then just outside London in 1849, the third son of a draper, and died in Chiswick in 1919. Little is known about his early artistic training, but in 1866, he became Edward Burne-Jones's first studio assistant, having been introduced to the painter by John Ruskin, to whom Murray had written for advice. He subsequently assisted Dante Gabriel Rossetti and G.F. Watts too, and by the early 1870s was illuminating manuscripts and drawing cartoons for stained glass for William Morris and his firm, as well as painting decorative panels for the art furniture makers Collinson and Locke. From 1873, he worked as a copyist for Ruskin in Italy, where he settled first at Siena and then from 1878 in Florence. In 1875, he married the 17-year-old Angelica Colivicchi from Volterra, with whom he would have 6 children. From around 1887, sorry, I shouldn't have moved there. From around 1887, while Angelica and their children continued to reside in Florence, Murray lived predominantly in London, where he established a second family with Blanche Richmond, with whom he would also have 6 children. He continued to paint and exhibit his work throughout the 1880s, but from this time he was mainly active as a collector and dealer. His interests and activities as such, focusing especially on Italian painting, mainly of the Trecento to the Cinquecento, and in particular of the then still neglected Sienese school. Portraiture of the 17th to the 19th centuries, especially British, English, French, German, Dutch, and Italian drawings, early Italian maiolica, one of several fields in which he anticipated and stimulated taste and market interest, sculpture, illuminated manuscripts, early printed books, and, against the odds of fashion, the works of the Pre-Raphaelites. Murray acted as agent for the National Gallery under Frederick Burton and for the South Kensington Museum under Philip Cunliffe Owen. He also acquired pictures for Julius Meyer and Wilhelm Bode and the Berlin museums, as well as for private collectors in England, Germany, and America, such as Ruskin himself, the insurance agent Charles Butler, the banker Robert Benson, and the American industrialist Samuel Bancroft. He was considered for the post of the director of the National Gallery on Burton's retirement in 1894. From the late 1890s, Murray enjoyed a sort of consultative and business association, though not formal partnership, with the London dealer Agnew's, an association crucial in consolidating and extending that firm's shift in trade from contemporary British art to old masters, and in particular to early Italian painting. Murray sold a considerable portion of his collection prior to his death in auctions held in Paris in 1914 and in London in 1917. In this same period, he donated an immense number of artworks to museums in Britain, Europe, and America. The remainder of his collection would be sold by his heirs privately and at auction in the decade following his death. Photographs figured prominently in Murray's artistic work, especially as a portraitist. It seems likely, indeed, he himself took photographs of sitters. He also supplied his Pre-Raphaelite mentors, Burne-Jones and Rossetti, with photographic views of Italy to incorporate into their own compositions. Comparison of photographs with one another and with the original artworks was fundamental to his historical investigation of art and to related correspondence with art historians, connoisseurs, and museum officials such as Burton, Meyer, and Bode, and also Giovan Battista Cavalcaselle. Photographically enhanced exchanges of this kind not infrequently served a commercial purpose too, and here the availability and circulation of reproductions was yet more critical. Murray had indeed avidly collected photographs, especially of paintings, from an early age. Already in 1876, not yet 30, he told his friend William Elias Spanton, himself a painter and photographer, that he possessed about 1,700, mostly acquired in Italy, where he enjoyed close relations with the Alinari and in particular with the Sienese photographer Paolo Lombardi. In 1874, both firms had carried out important campaigns for Murray, acting on Ruskin's behalf. Alinari of the Botticelli frescoes of episodes from the life of Moses in the Sistine Chapel, Lombardi of the separated front and rear main panels of Ducio's Maestà, then still in the Duomo in Siena, the rear panel representing the stories of Christ's Passion, having been temporarily removed to the premises of the Opera del Duomo, especially for this purpose. To the best of my knowledge, only 11 prints of the images taken by Lombardi in 1874 survive, 7 in the Malandrini collection of Sienese photographs owned and digitized by the Fondazione Monte dei Paschi of Siena, and 4 in the photographic collection of the Kunsthistorisches Institut in Florence. For then, still insuperable technical reasons to which the previous speaker alluded, the campaign was not a success. However, in 1886, having in the meantime been the means whereby 7 of the 9 dispersed Maestà Predella panels had been recovered and sold to the National Gallery, and as we saw in an earlier slide, to the Gemäldegalerie in Berlin and to Robert Benson, Murray himself commissioned Lombardi to undertake a second photographic campaign, including both main panels as well as those components of the original altarpiece which had long been separated from them, but had not left the Duomo, where they were displayed in the sacristy. By the time of his death in 1919, Murray's extensive multifunctional photographic archive doubtless numbered many thousands of images. Posthumous London sales from his estate listed numerous Solander box cases, portfolios, and albums containing unspecified quantities of photographs of Old Master and Pre-Raphaelite paintings and drawings, including works from his own and from Benson's collections. However, none of these lots is known to survive as an identifiable group. In Florence, on the other hand, a comparatively small number of Murray's photographs remained in the possession of his son Giovanni and is still with his Italian heirs, to whom I am grateful for permission to show images of some here. A more substantial portion remained with another Italian son in the villa at Tavernuzze outside Florence, which Murray had purchased around 1890 and which Carlo Eduardo inhabited until his death in 1970. This portion was afterwards acquired by the Tuscan photographer and collector of photographs Ferruccio Malandrini. It included 7 of the prints from Lombardi's 1874 Maestà campaign already mentioned, along with a series of 47 prints of photographs of the same work, consecutively numbered by Murray, numbered on the verso by Murray. Research undertaken by me in the archive of the Opera del Duomo in Siena in 2008 revealed these to document the campaign commissioned directly by Murray in 1886 and showed this campaign to have occasioned not only the definitive transferal of the various remnants of the altarpiece to the Opera del Duomo, generally assumed to have taken place a decade or so earlier, but also its first restoration by the painter Francesco Brogi and by the opera's master carpenter Salvatore Barni, until then unknown or rather forgotten. As already indicated, all of these prints, together with at least 28 others of paintings in the collection of the Istituto di Belle Arti and in the churches in Siena, mainly by Lombardi, passed from Malandrini to the Fondazione Monte dei Paschi around 20 years ago. Also included in the portion of Murray's photographic collection acquired by Malandrini were 5 bound albums, seemingly compiled by Murray himself. One of these, containing photographs by Brogi and Alinari, relates to the volume of photographs of the reliefs decorating Giotto's bell tower, issued by Ruskin in 1881 as a supplement to Mornings in Florence, a project in which Murray again had a part. The other albums contain views of the principal Tuscan cities, including views of Pisa by Van Lint, of Emilia, Romagna, Umbria, Rome, Pompeii, and Sicily. These now form part of the collection of the newly formed Fondazione Alinari, where it is hoped they will soon once more be accessible. The still considerable remainder of this portion of Mari's photographic archive has been donated by Malandrini to the Fondazione Memofonte, where it awaits conservation and cataloguing. It consists of around 790 prints, predominantly album imprints of Italian paintings, just under half of which were at some stage inserted, probably by Carlo Eduardo, Mari's son, into 4 albums illustrative of different schools. In the rest of this short paper, I will present a selection from both surviving portions of Mari's photographic archive, focusing on images that illustrate the use he made of photography in his various activities, or that variously invite investigation. The smaller of the 2 groups, still with the heirs of Giovanni Mari, is largely of biographical interest. It includes photographs of Mari himself and of various members of his family, or who may be presumed such, but have not yet been identified in all cases. In Florence, on the other hand, a comparatively small number of Mari's photographs remained in the possession of his son Giovanni and is still with his Italian heirs, to whom I am grateful for permission to show images of some here. A more substantial, sorry, I'm repeating my, all the more intriguing for the fact that this portion of Mari's photographic archive is mainly of biographical interest. All the more intriguing is the presence of 3 groups of photographs of a different character, 2 of them lacking any obvious connection with Mari. The first of these consists of 29 small album imprints, of which you see one here, which a few years back I was able to recognize as of Telemaco Signorini and members of the Degori family of Siena. A selection was included in the exhibition I Macchiaioli e la Fotografia, curated by Monica Maffioli for the Museo Alinari in 2008-2009, where they were attributed to Giulio Degori and dated to around 1868. How they came to be in Mari's possession is still not clear. A second mystery group consists of 25 photographs of ancient Greek temples and other sites, mainly representing the Acropolis in Athens, where Mari is not known to have been. At least 2 of these bear an intriguing resemblance to photographs taken by Mari's close friend, the American journalist and diplomat, William James Stillman. More easily explained are 2 sets of studies of girls, evidently sisters, one of which undoubtedly taken to aid Mari in painting a group portrait of the daughters of William Stillman's cousin Edgar in 1889. The portrait survives. The same may be assumed of the second set, probably of a similar date, which show 4 unidentified sisters in different poses. Despite removal of the Lombardi Maestà photographs, the portion of Mari's photographic archive now in the Fondazione Memofonte is still rich in photographs that document his special study of early Sienese painting. I'm grateful for permission from the Fondazione to show you some of these here. Of particular interest is a print of the Crucifixion from the Maestà, which has the appearance of belonging to the 1886 campaign by Lombardi. The series of prints relating to this, now in Siena, indeed lacks this scene, though a gap in Mari's numbering of them suggests that it may once have formed part of it. Further examination, and especially comparison of dimensions, will be needed. Another of numerous Lombardi photographs of early Sienese paintings is this, on the right, of this Adoration of the Cross by Bartolo Di Fredi, now in the Museo Civico Amedeo Lia of La Spezia. The photographer of this panel by Pellegrino di Mariano Rossi is, on the other hand, as yet unidentified. It was acquired, the panel was acquired by Murray from the Toscanelli collection in 1884 to 1885 and seen here in what would appear to be its original frame. It was one of a group of rare signed works by early Sienese masters in which Murray attempted to interest Border, but to no avail. It remained with Murray until his death and would be bought by the Florentine dealer Emilio Costantini from one of his Italian sons. Also from the Toscanelli collection was this Virgin and Child by Luca di Tomé on the left, which was bought for Charles Butler. The photograph is of interest in that it shows the painting in a frame a little more elaborate than that by which it is now enclosed in the Fitzwilliam Museum, that frame being devoid of pinnacles and supporting pilasters. The rose tracery has also been replaced by a solid decorated disc. The other photograph by the London firm of Henry Dixon and Son is of an altarpiece by Cosimo Rosselli, also bought by Murray for Butler, but in England at the Christie's sale of the Earl of Craven's collection. The collection also contains photographs of paintings acquired by Murray in Florence, such as this one of a pair of cassone or spaliere panels by Pesolino and representing stories of David, which Murray purchased jointly with Agnew and, unusually, through another and more serious art market rival, Stefano Bardini, from the Torrigiani in 1896. Other English photographers whose work is represented include Murray's friend William Spanton, his prints carefully marked with his name by Murray, and Frederick Hollier, who took these photographs of two predella panels representing the journey to and supper at Emmaus by Luca Signorelli, acquired by Murray for Benson in 1886 from the Tomasi of Cortona. Testimony to Murray's close, if troubled, relationship with Ruskin is this photograph by the Viennese Mietke Verlag of Titian's Madonna of the Cherries in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, Ruskin's signature showing it to have been approved by him as one of a quartet of lesson photographs issued to readers of Fors Clavigera in 1875 to 1876 and intended by him as forming the basis of domestic treasuries of beautiful art. I close with an image which up to around 48 hours ago appeared an impenetrable enigma. A first indication that this imposing but seemingly domestic space was somehow connected with Murray came with the recognition that the dominant painting is the Bazzolini altarpiece by Innocenzo da Imola, now in Forlì, which Murray purchased for and from Agnew's at the sale of the Driver collection at Christie's in 1912. It is probably this painting to which Murray referred in reporting to his son Giovanni in 1917 that the Uffizi would prefer to receive Caravaggio's Sacrifice of Isaac rather than the Innocenzo da Imola in donation from him. The Caravaggio was duly donated by Giovanni, nominally at least, by Giovanni Murray in that same year. Cristiano Giometti helped me make the connection between the marble bust seen to the left and Alessandro Algardi's portrait of Cardinal Paolo Emilio Zacchia Rondanini, now in the Museo del Bargello, but formerly in the collection of Ugo Oietti. For just such a bust, its attribution oscillating between Bernini and Algardi was among several artworks known by me to have been sold to Oietti by Giovanni Murray in 1919, seeming to correspond to the very fine bust of a cardinal ascribed to Bernini, those are Murray's own words, which Charles had acquired from another Florentine rival, Elia Volpi, in 1913 to decorate his picture gallery, which he had created in his new home in Via Marsilio Ficino in Florence. A mystery that remains, however, is an apparent slight discrepancy between the Bargello's bust and that seen in the photograph, which seems to show a sculpted stole or ribbon protruding below the extremity of the cardinal's surplice. This discrepancy poses a problem all the more pressing given that discovery of photographs by Alinari and Brogi, the latter engraved in Illustrazioni Italiane in 1890 of the studio in Via Marsilio Ficino of the painter Edoardo Gelli, prove Murray to have succeeded Gelli as incumbent of this space and the gallery in his photograph to have been his own. This photograph is thereby promoted from the status of illustrative document to that of primary source, directly providing evidence of the presence in Murray's collection in the period between 1913 and 1919 of a number of sculptures, paintings, and objects which it will help to identify. Starting from the two large armchairs, which curiously turn out, it would seem, to be replicas of a set of 17th century chairs, also in the Bargello, and whose striking upholstery have given its name to the so-called Bargello stitch, otherwise known as flame stitch or punto ungaro. It will also further investigation of the still largely obscure processes whereby the substantial and prestigious remainder of Murray's collection was sold by his sons in the period immediately following his death. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, for your fascinating research, which poses a lot of interesting questions, and also which show us how Murray was in touch with a lot of different people, artists, but also dealers, and very, very in-depth of the art market as well. I hope we can resolve the problem of the Zacchero Andolini bust as well. So thank you, Paul. And now we have 5 minutes of coffee break without coffee, and we will see at 4:30 for the second part of our first session. If you have questions for our speaker, you just have to send an email to our Photograph and Art Market address. Thank you very much. Well, now we have the PowerPoint of Ilaria, which I'm going to share, and I'm giving the word to Ilaria here. Here, the PowerPoint is here, full screen. Just before I have to again say the title of her paper, The Salvadori, the development of an aesthetic between art and
Sorry. It changed. There is a change in the title.
Okay.
Okay. The Salvadori are craftsmanship
and the development of an aesthetic. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And again, I'm sorry for the inconvenience. This lecture will address various aspects of documentation in the photographic archive of the Florentine art dealers Salvadori, which survives in near complete form and has recently been purchased by the Berenson Library from the heirs of the dealers. I shall discuss various aspects of the documentation, which have much in common with other archives of this kind, and offer some consideration of both archival and technical nature that arise when one is dealing with this sort of collection. I should state at the outset that the study of this archive is still at a preliminary stage. These images, next please, are, sorry, oh, thank you. These and next one. As indicated by the original captions, illustrate the Galleria Salvadori, and in particular the showroom of the firm founded by Salvadore and his son Giuseppe Salvadori. They benefited from the fruitful business conditions that existed in Florence after the city had become capital of Italy, and were among the most important dealers there until 1930. These images refer to the showroom of the company housed in the Palazzo Magnani Ferroni in Borgo San Frediano. The photographs document the objects displayed by the Salvadori in settings that evoked an interior furnished for prospective clients. Next, please. This was a richly adorned space, next please, with furniture, painting, next slide please, sculpture, fabrics, and rugs, next please. The photograph of these objects are in one of the 16 albums in the Salvadori archive, which have been digitized and can be therefore be consulted through our online catalog. Next slide, please. Next. Here is the finding aid of the archive, available through the Harvard Library catalog. The title of this album, next slide please, is Interior Decoration, and it functioned as a tool for presentation and sale to the client. The series of albums with summary titles such as Interior Decoration, next one please, Object for Sales, or Objects Sold, purely miscellaneous in content, are accompanied by thematic volumes dedicated to single categories of objects. These, next please, bear the original title, Sculptures, Tapestries, Armor, and then other lacking titles dedicated to furniture or stonework, or containing photographs of tapestries, one of the firm's areas of focus, as Denise Bad has already pointed out. Tapestries were not only offered for sale, but could be restored, and the Salvatori set up a conservation lab, next please, on the top floor of the Palazzo, appealing not only to private clients, but also to great museums. In almost all the photo albums, the Salvadori items are interspersed with eminent examples of similar works of art, presenting rivals pieces that were anything but poor. Suffice it to cite some example, next please, from the sculptures album. The David given to Bernardo or Antonio Rossellino, and next, the bust of the young Saint John the Baptist, attributed to a follower of Desiderio da Settignano. These sculptures, now housed in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, came from the Widener collection, which they had entered through Salvadori. Both of them, next please, were originally, next slide please, in the Martelli collection in Florence.
Beh, allora
The former one. Thank you. Like the full-length Young Baptist by Desiderio da Settignano, which in 1913 the then Soprintendente Giovanni Poggi decided to have purchased by the Bargello Museum for a figure below its market value, probably has been suggested, making it possible in exchange to export the other two marbles. Some of the album pages juxtapose outstanding sculptures so evenly that one wonders which one outdoes the other in quality. When these albums came into my hands, I asked myself as an archivist how I should treat them, not only ensuring they were preserved, but allowing scholars to consult them, which is the prime objective of every institution with archival holdings. It seemed to me that when consulted, the volumes should retain the appearance they once had, in order to show how they were used and convey the impressions they originally made on their intended audience. Yet, the simple act of consulting such special object risked going against the rules of proper preservation, which guarantees the long-term use of a document. I therefore decided to have the album scanned with a planetary scanner so they could be read in the correct sequence by the mirador viewer and restricting direct consultation only to very special and justified cases. An idea of what these albums consist of can be had, for instance, by looking at the second volume of Object for Sale. Thank you. One can see pages with diagonal cuts made to facilitate mounting photographs of different sizes. There are various copies of A Virgin and Child. If you can click on the little point after 21, no, please. I can't show the other. It's okay. It's followed by chair, portals, armor, fragment of rugs, precious fabrics, tapestries with measurements, frame, and so on, as well as a harpsichord and some sculptures. Multiple copies of the same photograph indicate that these images could be given to clients, serving as reminders to take home, reflect on, and imagine them laid out in their own spaces with measurements in mind. Most of the photos are albumen prints, but there are also aristotypes and carbon and gelatin prints. Two of the albums were made with an apparently different and complementary function to that of these sale catalogs. Please, the next. They have no titles, the images are glued to the pages, and they are marked with a printed number, which often also appears engraved on the emulsion of the negative plate. Here are some of the pages from the first of these volumes, which has been treated at the Opificio delle Pietre Dure in Florence. I am grateful to Barbara Cattaneo for these images of work in progress. More albumen prints showing chairs, objects. Next, please. Small sculptures with measurement. Next, please. Sometimes, next, the dimension appear. Next, please. On the back of the photographs. In this instance, alongside its price. Clients could find an object in the thematic albums where photographs were usually available in multiple copies. Conversely, if a photo was not available, the system of printed...
Available.
Sorry?
No.
Available. The system of printing numbers allowed one to identify the negative for producing further copies. For the most part, the photographic plates now in the Salvadori archive document objects and works of art offered for sale by the dealers. Next slide, please. There are about 1,820 photographs divided into formats, all in centimeters of 13 by 18, 18 by 24, 21 by 27, 24 by 30, and 30 by 40. Originally, they were stored in wooden boxes with separator and numbered spaces for each plate. After being cleaned and restored, these were all digitized, and they will soon be viewable online through the finding aid of the Salvadori Archive, as is already the case with the albums. The names of the authors of the photograph and prints are among the many received housed in the archive. They are, next slide, please. Above all, Luigi and Rodolfo Reali, as well as Vittorio Next, Jacquier, Michele Schemboche, thank you, the Barsottis and others, while Arinari appears almost exclusively as a seller of art historical books. Next, please. The presence of photographic apparatus in the archive and the close study of many of the images confirms what the invoices tell us, that many of the photos were taken in the firm's own rooms, sometimes extemporaneously. The photos inserted or pasted into the albums are accompanied in the Salvadori documentation by loose, sometimes large-scale images. These include, next please, the 3 panels by Sassetta from the Salsepolcro Polyptych in the Berenson Collection at Itati. Next, the souvenir photo of the inauguration of the Palazzo d'Avanzati Museum and others. One of these, reworked, next please, helps us to introduce another significant aspect of the Salvadori business. This is an Alinari photograph of Valerio Cioli's Medici candelabrum at the Bargello, integrated and enhanced with an impeccably drawn multi-arm extension. The image is flanked with many more of the company's documents, such as accounts and receipts, with numerous references to integration, but also to objects made from scratch out of ancient or new material, sometimes starting, as here, from illustrated prototypes, replicating them in whole or in part. The Salvadori made use of unsurpassed artisans and many highly skilled workers, directing them with a true sense of taste and keeping up with the demands of the period. The careful drawing of these and other images in the archive takes us back to the phenomenon of expert artisanal craftsmanship, which distinguishes that whole milieu, whose evocation of the Middle Ages or the Renaissance was a topic of discussion even in the art theories and history writing of the time. Coming to my conclusion, I can underline another aspect bordering that of photography and consequent to it, which we come across in other similar archives, as Lynn Cutterson has pointed out with regard to the Bardini archive, drawings and sketches. The progression from this sheet to pure drawings is short, moving from a tracing, please next, as indicated on this other sheet, where we read prix d'après la photographie d'un candélabre de l'église de San Giorgio a Venise, next to a watercolor drawing, next, and pencil drawings, and different next versions of the same subject. Bronze objects, terracotta sculpture, and then furniture presenting next in a domestic interior with human figures to give a sense of scale who could have come out of contemporary theater sketches, but who are also brother next, please, of the page boys in many contemporary Florentine painting, evoking medieval or Renaissance fantasy of the kind much loved by Stefano Bardini himself as painter. Among these drawings, in conclusion, I should like to present others that describe library cabinets. Please, next. Perhaps intended to hold ancient precious texts and made to cover the walls of studies and living rooms. The various proposals are accompanied, next please, and next, by a plan of a large room intended to house books along its walls. This brightly lit space with 3 windows, 2 doors, and a large fireplace was recreated in New York by an Italian. It is in fact, as the description indicates, the residence of Ernesto Fabri and his wife Edith, located on 95th Street near 5th Avenue, now called the House of the Redeemer. The current website of this institution reminds us that the interior design was carried out by Ernesto's brother, Egisto Fabri, who owned and lived in the villa of Bagazzano near Fiesole. He was, with Charles Lezer, one of the first Florentine collectors of Cézanne. The website, next please, also features images of the interiors, some of which have recently provided iconic settings for an Amazon video series, The Hunters, which center on the fictional but convincingly scripted figure of Meyer Hoffman, played by Al Pacino, a Jewish philanthropist who had survived the Holocaust and is tracking down the last Nazis. Next, please. Another click, please. Next, please. Next. The images of this library recall another such place, a more familiar one to me, that of Itati, significantly similar and completed in 1915, a year before the Fabri drawings were made by the British architect and designer Cecil Pinsent. He was a client of De Salvadori on behalf of an exceptional American, Bernard Berenson, who was in constant touch with the Fabri at Bagazzano, and I would say a model of good taste. Berenson, Fabri, and Pinsent, 3 individuals not only connect with each other, but also with the Salvadori firm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilaria. This material is so beautiful and so rich, and reminds me, as you said, as Lynn Cutterson pointed out, of the material of Bardini for the drawings, but also for the use of photograph in a very creative way. It's very interesting, this interlink between Bardini and Salvadori.
Yes,
and of course, we will speak about Bardini on Saturday with director Marco Mozzo, who is studying this wonderful material. Thank you very much, Ilaria.
Thank you. And sorry.
And now we go to the last speaker of today, Patricia Ferrari. Welcome. And she's from the Art History Institute, School of Arts and Humanities of the University of Lisbon. And in fact, she's going to speak about the Gulbenkian Museum, Building a Fairy Tale, the role of images in acquisition of the Lally collection of the Calouste Gulbenkian Museum. Thank you, Patricia. You can share your screen.
Hello. Yes, I'm going to share.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. No.
Okay.
Right. You seeing the presentation?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, right. So good afternoon. This study was developed as part of my PhD research, which is focused on the artist René Lalique and the collectors of his artworks. So I will start by presenting the collector Sarkis Gulbenkian and his collection. Gulbenkian was born in 1869 in the old Ottoman Empire, but developed his studies in Marseille and London. He became one of the big figures of the oil industry, accumulating a great wealth that allowed him to build one of the most important art collections in the world. In 1942, due to the advance of the Second World War, Gulbenkian moved to Lisbon with his family. Besides being a neutral country, Portugal was geographically well located, facilitating a possible departure for the United States. The collector lived in the country until the end of his days, leaving his collection in Lisbon, where the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation was established in 1956. The collection includes more than 6,000 works of art and is known for its variety and eclecticism. Among paintings, sculptures, and the great diversity of decorative arts, the works go from pre-classical antiquity to the first decades of the 20th century, including pieces from Europe, Islam, and Asia. Gulbenkian made his first purchase in 1883 at only 14 years old when he bought a set of Greek coins in an Istanbul bazaar. However, his collecting activity began only in 1896. When acquiring artworks, Gulbenkian enjoyed being discreet and usually recurred to intermediaries or dealers, keeping his distance from big auctions and sales. He was a very rigorous and demanding client who wanted only the best. He also dealt directly with artists like Lalique, to whom he bought almost 300 works of art. René Lalique is one of the most recognized artists from the Art Nouveau movement, being known as the creator of the modern jewel. Born in 1860, Lalique began his apprenticeship as a jeweler at 16 years old and opened his first atelier in 1885. After 1912, he dedicated his career to the art of glass, merging art and industry in the production of elegant Art Deco objects. Lalique has a special place among the Gulbenkian collection. The group of artworks that Gulbenkian acquired from the French artist stands out for various reasons. First, for the quantity of objects. Second, for the quality and diversity of the artworks that represent every phase of the artist's career, including some of his masterpieces. This also reveals how the collector followed his work, doing purchases for more than 3 decades. Lastly, what makes this collection so special is the fact that almost every work was bought directly from the artist, with only 2 exceptions. This was only possible because, besides their business relationship, Lalique and Gulbenkian were close friends. They met around 1895 in London through the actress Sarah Bernhardt, and their friendship lasted until the end of their lives. Both men found solace in nature and beauty, things that were materialized in the artworks that Gulbenkian acquired from Lalique. The current collection includes 183 works, even though, as we've mentioned before, Gulbenkian acquired a total of 275 objects, almost 300. Among this group, we may find jewelry, drawings, glassworks, and objets d'art. Gulbenkian purchased his first Lalique jewel in 1897. The last acquisition was a glasswork bought in 1932. But besides the objects, Lalique also projected some interior design sets for Gulbenkian's Parisian residence, including a bathroom, a door, and a windbreak screen. Regarding the acquisition processes, As we've mentioned earlier, only 2 pieces were not directly bought from the artist. One was acquired at a jewelry shop and had belonged to the actress Wanda de Bonxe. The other, represented in this image, was, according to a document from the Kubenkin archives, bought in a sale. Our research through these archives led us to a better understanding of how the objects were selected and purchased by Kubenkin. A few works were commissioned, some were adapted to the collector's taste, but most of the artworks were selected from the ones Lalique had already executed or designed. Kubenkin was a frequent visit at the artist's atelier, where he picked most of the objects. Furthermore, the consulted documents revealed that some deals were also done through written correspondence. Among Lalique's letters to Kubenkin, we found several references to aesthetic adjustments, delivery dates, price negotiations, updates on the execution of some works, and the exchange of drawings representing Lalique's creations. Most of the times, the artworks were delivered in hand through a courier or by Lalique himself, though they could also be sent by mail or picked up at the atelier. As we've seen, some of the artworks Kubenkin acquired from Lalique were chosen or seen for the first time through the drawings sent by the artist. And though they are not mentioned in the letters, Kubenkin also received some photographs. This detail takes us to the second half of our presentation regarding the use of images in the art market, especially in the building of the Lalique collection of the Calouste-Gulbenkian Museum. From the end of the 19th century, photography became an excellent means of advertising for the arts, promoting cultural dissemination and the visual circulation of works of art, allowing them to reach new possible buyers and stimulating the globalization of the art market, simplifying negotiations, especially in long-distance deals. According to João Carvalho Dias, curator at the Calouste-Gulbenkian Museum, this was a common practice at the time. Beyond the works of Lalique, Gulbenkian had considered the acquisition of a painting by Gauguin through this method. Moreover, he acquired a group of artworks from the Hermitage Museum that were also selected through the catalogs. From the artist's perspective, these images were a great opportunity to reach a larger audience. Photographs and drawings of Lalique's creations were very common in French periodicals and magazines, as you can see in this picture. Some of these articles were translated and published in the United States, which took the name of Lalique to the other side of the Atlantic, where in 1904, he exhibited for the first time, having already a crowd of enthusiasts awaiting for his display. At last, we must mention the existence of photographs from works in progress, more specifically of the preparation models of some objects. This type of images were sent to the collector before the creation of the final work in order to confirm every detail, while adjustments were still possible to be made. Let's now take a closer look to the case of the Lalique collection of the Calouste-Gulbenkian Museum. As you can see through the images, there's a great similarity between the drawing and the final artwork. They are both in the Gulbenkian collection. And drawing had always had a great relevance in the art of René Lalique, especially during his career as a jeweler. So, as you can see in the images, the resemblance between the project and the executed work is tremendous. The drawings were no less realistic than a photograph. As suggested by various letters exchanged between Lalique and his clients, these drawings could be sent in different situations: when the work hadn't been executed, when it had been commissioned and was still being designed, and when there was no photograph available. However, most of the times, the drawings were returned to the artist who needed them to proceed with his work. In the Gulbenkian collection, we can find a group of 22 drawings, all representing jewels. 14 of them show works from the collection, acquired between 1900 and 1904, but the other 8 at a different end, being that some of them might not have been created. Oh, I'm sorry. Some of them might not have been created, while others can be found in museum collections and catalogs. It is very likely that Lalique sent these drawings to Gulbenkian with the purpose of selling them, but they were refused by the collector. When compared to photographs, drawings have the advantage of being able to show different plastic solutions, namely when the work is not yet executed, allowing for changes according to the client's tastes. So, as we've seen, photography had an important role in the dissemination of Lalique's artworks. Also, during the 1920s, while working as a glass artist, photography was crucial in the elaboration of his factory's commercial catalog. Concerning the Kubenkin collection, there is a set of 6 photographs, one of them showing 2 objects, which means there are 7 artworks represented. But despite this small number, the images allow us to reach some conclusions. 2 of the photographs show the preparation models of artworks acquired by Gulbenkian, with some differences when compared to the final works. This suggests Gulbenkian was aware of the producing process. Furthermore, the existence of letters mentioning both artworks allows us to conclude they were commissioned by the collector. In the remaining photographs, we found artworks whose acquisition was considered but not finalized. Besides not being included in the present collection, they do not match the descriptions of other works found in the documentation. One of the works is the one here in this slide, whose photograph was among the Gulbenkian archives, and as we later found, also printed in the Art et Décoration magazine. The artwork may be seen today at the Arts and Crafts Museum of Hamburg. In this way, we may conclude that in the composing process of the Lalique collection of the Calouste Gulbenkian Museum, images were important, but played a secondary role, mostly because of the close relation and frequent meetings held between the artist and the collector. As such, drawings and photographs were mainly used as an alternative, when in-person negotiations were not possible. Furthermore, and for our final chapter, we shall underline the relevance that the drawings of Lalique had in his career. This letter Lalique sent to Gulbenkian between 1901 and 1903 reveals 2 important aspects regarding his drawings. First, Gulbenkian was clearly a special client, one of the few who was allowed to keep Lalique's drawings, which also confirms how fond the artist was of his own designs. Second, though they were an important step in Lalique's creative process, the artist did not previously design every single object he made. This information ends the ongoing debate about the possible existence of a drawing for each work of art created by Lalique. At last, after considering the role Lalique's drawings had in his negotiations, especially exemplified in the letters he exchanged with Gulbenkian, but also present in his deals with other clients, we may now attribute an even greater importance to these designs. Besides being relevant for the creative process of Lalique's objects and having such tremendous artistic quality on their own, the drawings were very important documents and means of communication. The presence of notes in the drawings indicating dates, like the one shown here, client names, materials, techniques, measures, thickness, and other elements concerning the artworks has been understood as a way of Lalique communicating with the artisans at his atelier, making sure the executed pieces matched his ideals in detail. However, we now consider that these notes may have had 2 different purposes. Beyond their function as guides for the artisans, they were done with the intention of complementing the drawings and help the clients understand the material aspects of the artworks. As such, and to conclude my presentation, we may affirm that images played an undoubtedly important role in René Lalique's career, not only in his creative and production processes, but also in his commercial relationships with clients and collectors. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for this beautiful paper and for showing us how Lalique used drawings in order not only to help artisans, but also to sell his works of art. And Gulbenkian was a good client,
Yes,
as we have seen.
definitely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we are in the last part of our session, and we can open the discussion with the questions to our speakers of the afternoon. I am pleased to ask if some of our colleagues and speakers of the day have some question for regarding the papers, today's papers. You can write your answer in the chat or directly ask. I saw that there was a question by Paolo.
Maybe Matilde Cartolari raised the hand. Not a virtual hand, it was just a simple question.
Yes, no, but if you want, you can go first.
No, please do. You break the ice. Go ahead, please.
Okay. No, it's not really a question, but it's just a small remark for Darius Spieth. I don't see you now in my screen, so I hope you're here.
No, unfortunately, Matilde, maybe Cristiano can challenge this, correct? I don't see Darius with my name.
Darius is not more with us. He probably had a lecture or something.
Correct. He told me privately that he urged for a lesson. So maybe Matilde, you can ask tomorrow or
Yes.
wherever.
Yes, maybe I can. If he's there tomorrow, I might join the discussion and talk to him tomorrow.
Absolutely. Anyhow, if you wish, I'm sure that Darius, who's a very generous person intellectually, can say, I can send you the mail so you can get in touch with him anyhow.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't see he was not there anymore because I'm not seeing every participant on my screen, so I thought it was simply silent.
He's not in the webinar anymore, but he's still here. I mean, in this world. I mean,
still alive.
Paolo, do you want me to read the answer for Denis Bad, or you want to do that?
I have several questions, I must say, because I was deeply interested by many, let's say all of them. And let me check it. Do you have it in your hand? I mean, the question for Denis Bad was this way, Denise. Speaking about the Salvadori, you clearly remarked the absence or loss of Charles Fult's archive. That's truly a shame. But you also showed evidence of Salvadori's firm use of photographs in connection to works of art, in this case of tapestries. This is connected to the booklet Arazzis by Salvadori, or you found some other evidence? Probably you're going to work over it for the proceedings of our webinar. And beside this, if yes, did you find something else, or you're going to work through Faccioli's taking over of the firm? Talking about the tapestries, I mean, Faccioli's firm would go further and further ahead. I was wondering if they were not only restorers, but also, as often happens, they were sellers of tapestries. Thank you.
Well, last thing first, which is that after Salvadori. So Folk partners with Salvadori until he dies. And then several years before Folk dies, he already started working and sort of was nascently founding French and Company, right, with French and Mitchell Samuels. So his tapestry collection, the sort of heir to that tapestry collection, is the Getty Archive. And there are a few of Folk's tapestries there in photograph form. Like they have photographs with some of the archives. They use the photographs much more as catalogs. You know, the back of the photograph had all of the sales information and it had the provenance information and things like that. And they actually, what's very interesting is that Folk relied so much on photographs because he had to. He couldn't move around. But on the other hand, as soon as French and Company took over his business, they would say, they would write to people, we would like you to buy these tapestries. We're not going to give you photographs, but we will send them to you. We will bring them to you. You know, they were so wary, maybe of that experience, that they really just didn't sell well that way. As for Folk's archive, yeah, we don't have his papers. So everything that I've pieced together from him were things, I almost always have his voice rather than the return voice. Except for a few cases in the Salvadori archive where there's like copies of the letters. So, you know, I've been in touch with his heirs and descendants all over in America and throughout Europe, like looking for his papers, but they don't exist. And in fact, there may have been a fire because that's what he said. Well, I don't know. That's what he said happened to that book he was writing. It burned. I should try to do that next time I have to write a paper. Sorry, I wrote the paper, but it burned. So... But anyway, yeah, I'm hoping to find more. But for now, I'm piecing it together based on what he says.
Thank you very much.
And Paolo, if I may, I have a question for Paul. Did you finish?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. I was deeply satisfied by the answer.
Ciao, Paul. I'd like to go back to I'd like to go back to what Costanza Caraffa said about increasing value, about photography and value, and you have shown a photograph reproducing on a mountain card, reproducing a picture by a Venetian painter, and with the signature of Ruskin. So, which is the meaning of that signature? Was it about the photograph and on the mountain card? Was it supposed to be shown to somebody or to have a role on the confirmation of an attribution?
No, it wasn't a question of attribution. It was a question of the, let's say, the editorial project, or the educational project, to be more precise. That photograph was one of four, a set of four, by different photographers of different artworks, which Ruskin made available to readers of his prototypical blog, Fors Clavigera, which was published by himself, and it was illustrated. Not all the letters were illustrated, but quite often they were illustrated. This was an example of a supplement published through one of his many assistants, disciples, William Ward, who worked for him as a copyist, as Murray had done. And they were an exercise in, well, an example really to readers of Fors Clavigera, which was intended, although probably wasn't always read by workmen, artisans in Britain, intended as an example of the way to form a kind of domestic treasury, as he puts it, a private museum, a domestic museum of what Ruskin considered to be significant artworks. And he comments, there are various letters in the series in which he returns to one or another of the images and comments on them from various angles, as was his wont. One of the other images was the Filippo Lippi, modern Virgin and Child in the Uffizi. So the purpose of the signature, I think, was to authenticate, as it were, the photograph from that point of view. It also meant that Ruskin approved the quality of the photograph.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay.
If I may, also to Paul, was very interesting the image we have discussed in his previous conference. And I want you to understand better if this kind of period room was made by Murray to sell the works of art, or just to have a beautiful room in his house in Florence.
I think more the latter. This was intended to be his final resting place, as it were. He was a very eminently restless person who sort of shuttled backwards and forward between England and Italy, between his two families, for all of his working life. He intended to come back to Florence. He purchased this house in Via Marsilio Ficino. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to live there for very long. The First World War happened. In the middle of the war, he was still attempting to go backwards and forwards between England and Italy and trying to bring things together. He had a very, very complicated problem to solve, which was how and what to pass on to his heirs, his two families. He, in this period, he also suffered a series of strokes, and the upshot was that he died in England in 1919. But this was intended to be his home. However, the photograph may well have been used, or this kind of photograph may well have been used partly for commercial purposes by himself. His collection was never so stable that works weren't for sale. And it may well have been used by his sons, Giovanni and another son called Roberto, who were preeminently involved in selling his what remained of his extraordinary collection. And I mentioned the sale of the bust to Oietti, another work which was in Murray's possession at the time of his death, and which was sold by Giovanni to Oietti, I think to Oietti, but it was sold around the same time, was the relief by Jacopo della Quercia, which is now in the Museo dell'Opera del Duomo in Siena. Works of this quality. And it may be that the photograph, which was certainly taken before 1919, because the bust was sold by Giovanni to Oietti not long after his father's death. There may have been other photographs of this kind, which I think the flat, or the house, it's not clear how much of the house was occupied by Murray, was certainly used as a showroom by the sons for probably around a decade.
Thank you, Paul. I have the same question, if I may, to Adriana Turpin, because I wanted to understand better how these wonderful interior of British houses were perceived and received in the US. This furniture, this reconstruction was quite, accepted, or it was changed to the taste of the US collectors and customers.
Oh, golly. Well, I mean, as you know, with period rooms in museums, they were, of course, changed and altered to fit dimensions and to, again, look what, as the 19th or early, Gilded Age collector wanted to see them. So I'm sure that the ones in private houses, many of which, of course, have sort of, been passed on, dismantled, etc. We don't have the same, I think, record of them that we would have in the from the museums. And again, I'd have to go back with John Harris, as I said there's something like 300. So they were clearly very popular, and there were houses which were completely furnished in English interiors and English furnitures. Then there were other houses where, like the Goulds, it was one room in a house which was otherwise predominantly French, also very often with period interiors. And Bruno Pons, I think, famously sort of looked at those and the way they've been changed. So I'm sure they were changed. And there's interesting work done on the phenomenon of the Colonial Revival, which really sort of took off after 1877. And I mean, I'm an American, I grew up, I never realized that all those sort of, white clapboard houses were part of a colonial revival. They were just what people lived in. But there was a huge move to making architecture and interiors look as if it was part of colonial America. And I think that's one of the nuances with the period room. They wanted to go back to, their sort of interiors that fitted that look. Then you have other collectors. There's a man called Morton in Rhode Island who, he builds a house and he completely makes it up from scratch, but he puts in the furniture. So he puts in a colonial room from an American colonial quote idea. And that's the same with Williamsburg, the governor's palace in Williamsburg. Rockefeller's idea was architecture was American, the furniture was English a lot of the time. And supplied by Lenigan. So I mean, it's a huge story, and I think it's fascinating because we haven't looked at it very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Adriana. Do we have other questions?
Yes, please. Cristiano, if I may.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. The question is for Ilaria Della Monica. Is she still in the picture?
Yes, I see her.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Hello again. And I've followed your paper, and as well as all the others, with great attention. And what attracted me of your paper was the connection that you somehow let's see in transparency. Of course, the time was short as for you as for everybody, so I understand that. But the connection between selling, restoring, and copying, and maybe to make falsifications. Did you find evidence? You started to reflect over it? Because everybody knows that Francesca Bambelli tomorrow is going to present and to work on San Giorgi, who put up actually a kind of catena di montaggio, no?
Yes.
In this way. So I would like to know if there is something else that you could tell about this.
Yeah, as Cristiano Giometti was suggesting, there are many similarities between Bardini and Salvadori, and they also between the two archives, and the many documents in the documental archive and the papers refer to a lot of restoration, but also there are some photographs with the notes on the back with two different prices, the original one and the copy. And they had a lot of raw material from the refurbishing of the old city, the houses with the Florence, the capital, with the, yes, of course. I can understand. And
I'm sorry.
with this big change related to Florence as capital, they had a lot of material as wood, furniture, and sometimes broken, sometimes not, and they sold a lot of material at a very low price. So they were able to, and they, I think we have to think about the craftsmanship in Florence there. And because after this is a long story and is not the and perhaps the moment to face it. But in Florence at the time, there were very good artisans, and they were able to copy and to make fakes. And also the Angeli, the painters working for Elia Volpi. I saw the documents, and they were sending 20 Ghirlandaio, 30 Botticellis to Miami, to Florida, and so on. And as there were painters, there were other artisans. And so one of the things it's interesting to face, it's what was the idea of Florence, the idea of Renaissance, or as Middle Ages, because as you know, this was a story, a interesting story related to the craftsmanship and the revival of the craftsmanship from Ruskin on, but not only directed towards Middle Ages, but also as Semper or other historians were saying, also directed to the revival of the Renaissance. And Bardini and Salvadori were perhaps the translator of this taste. And I haven't still studied deeply this phenomenon, but it's interesting to understand what was the taste in this common revival of the Renaissance, because in the showroom of Salvadori, you can see some interiors, and it's a model for the revival of the Renaissance. And also in the House of Redeemer in New York. But if you see the Berenson interior, and I think it's one of the first example of this, you find a little different interpretation, a more monastic one, perhaps. So there is a common revival with different interpretation, perhaps. I don't know if I answered your question.
Perfectly. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank
you. May I, if there is some time left?
Yes, please, Donata.
Just a very quick question to Paul. I wonder, have you ever, in your investigation of the scattered sorry, I didn't put on the screen. In your investigations on Fairfax Maris photographic funds, which are very scattered all around, have you ever have you maybe ever found any evidence of manipulation of photographs? I mean, photographs cut or pasted or also annotated with I don't know, with attributions or comments on either on style or on conservation. I have in mind Cavalcaselle's photographs, which were very much manipulated, which were cut and pasted and so on, and all they were almost a palimpsest for further annotation and further comments and so on. And so, in other words, can we think of photography as a space where the art dealers' practices and the connoisseurs' practices either coincide or meet or not?
Certainly we can. In the case of Fairfax Murray, it's a little difficult to gauge the extent to which he made use of photographs in that way, partly because we have so little survives of his photograph collection, and what does survive obviously has been sort of filtered through family usage. And one particular problem, and which will require close examination, is the fact that unfortunately his handwriting, which is quite distinctive, is very close to that of his son Carlo Eduardo, who put a lot of those photographs into albums. And so there are occasionally notes, mainly names of painters with a question mark on the back of some of the photographs, but it's not always clear, except where the attribution is completely out of question. And Carlo Eduardo certainly wasn't in his father's league, to put it mildly. It's not always clear whether it's Murray father or Murray son who's making the notes. It is sometimes clear, and I can think of, one of the photographs which I didn't show of a painting by Bartolo di Fredi, now considered to be Bartolo di Fredi, with the name of the painter on the back with the question mark. And there are other cases which it'll be more difficult to disentangle. What we don't, I don't think Murray was not a systematic thinker or writer, and it's extremely unlikely that he would made a systematic use of any of the material which he used. So but it certainly does seem to have happened occasionally. I don't know of any photographs that have been manipulated in the sense that you imply. And he seems to have shuffled uncut photographs and not particularly mounted. Well, again, we don't have access to what were clearly part of his collection, these portfolios and albums that are mentioned in the sales that we unfortunately don't. I mean, the 5 albums now in the Alinari Fondazione, which I only caught a brief glimpse of many years ago. When it becomes possible to see those again, that may help reply to the question, perhaps in part. But at the moment, it's a difficult one to answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. And we do have other questions. Otherwise, since it's quite late and we were supposed to close a little bit earlier, and our link is going to fall down in 15 minutes, I would say that if there are no more questions, we could thanks all our speakers for this rich and stimulating afternoon for the opening of our conference. And I would say that we could see and welcome everybody tomorrow morning at 9 for the second session of our conference in Italian tomorrow, speaking about merchants, connoisseurs and amateurs, and photographic tools for the market as well. I would like to ask to my colleagues if they have to say something and greet our speakers as well. Paolo, Donata, Patrizia and Marco.
No, Cristiano, è tutto a posto. Ho visto il dottor Tartuferi che inavvertitamente mi prendo la responsabilità, ho fra virgolette rimosso e sono contento che sia rientrato, e io insieme a qualcuno, insomma, sono a disposizione per provare il PowerPoint.
Private
information. Sì, no, if somebody else wants to join Dr. Tartuferi in trying the PowerPoint, I'm here. I'll be here at the end of the session.
Okay. So thank you very much and see you tomorrow. Thank you.